Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be putting Gardevoir EX in the spotlight for the World Championships 2025. Gardevoir has been the best performer in the Journey Together format, in addition to the Destined Rivals format, so heading into the World Championships, it's certainly one of the top decks to beat, and to consider yourself if you're going to be playing the deck or playing against it at the World Championships. Let's go over the overview in today's video. We're going to do the general strategy of Gardevoir, give you guys a skeleton list, then we're going to look at the recent event history and online matchup data in terms of popularity, then we're going to talk about the other conclusions and filling those final few spots, as well as giving some example deck lists for a various number of builds of Gardevoir, and then we'll delve into the matchups themselves of the top other contenders in the room, and how Gardevoir has to navigate the awkwardness in those matchups, and talk about how you can try and navigate those matchups the best. Let's start off with the general strategy then, and it revolves around Gardevoir EX, of course. The Psychic Embrace ability allows you to attach a basic Psychic from your discard pile to one of your Psychic Pokemon, and if you do, you put 2 counters on that Pokemon. This isn't limited to once a turn. This is as often as you like, so we can really ramp up a ton of energy all onto one Pokemon if we would wish. Yes, of course, we're consistently damaging our Pokemon, but that's actually somewhat of an upside as well when we get into the sorts of attackers that we use and some other abilities that we have that synergize well in the deck. Firstly though, let's mention that it has 310 hit points and has that Miracle Force attack. For 2 Psychic and 1 Colourless, you deal 190 and you recover from all special conditions. It's a nice upside. 190 is decent enough damage to 2-hit KO stage 2 EXs and falls a little bit shy of knocking out the majority of basic EX Pokemon, but that can sometimes be an upside because it allows us to play around our opponent's Pheasantipity EX, knowing that we can finish these Pokemon off that we damage with Miracle Force on a future turn, perhaps with one of the best friends of Gardevoir, Monkey Dory. The Adrenabrain ability turns the downside of Psychic Embrace into massive upside, because if Monkey Dory has a Darkness Energy attached, once per turn we can move up to 3 counters from one of our Pokemon to one of our opponent's Pokemon. Immediately, this ability gives Gardevoir so much flexibility. Like I said, playing around Pheasantipity EX is one of the crucial selling points of this archetype, which means we're denying our opponent's draw power. As the game draws on and they've taken a number of prize cards, we can be the one using Iono against them, and also stopping the use of Flip the Script, which is typically one of the best ways to counteract an Iono to a low hand size. We can do meaningful damage without taking a knockout, knowing that if we can buy a turn back from our opponents, if they only take a single prize knockout, or if Gardevoir is too big to be KO'd, for example, and we don't submit prize cards, we can come back with Adrenabrain and win on the next turn by taking multiple prizes with our abilities, as well as ending our turn on an attack. In the same vein, we could also target down multiple Pokemon at once. We could be announcing an attack knocking out the active, whilst using Adrenabrain from a number of our Monkey Dory onto a benched Pokemon, targeting it completely with Adrenabrain the ability. Because once again, one of the strengths of Psychic Embrace is that we're constantly fueling our discard pile with these energy and flinging them back into play via Gardevoir, which means we float our turn attachments for multiple Monkey Dory. So not just one here, oftentimes it's going to be 3 or 4 copies within our deck, and the real power of Gardevoir is getting as much Adrenabrain as possible because it allows us to be so flexible with that damage output. The other Pokemon that really benefits from being self-damaged via Psychic Embrace is Screamtail. It's a naturally phenomenal partner here with that Roaring Scream attack. For 1 Psychic and 1 Colourless, you do 20 to one of your opponent's Pokemon for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So if you put 4 Psychic on Screamtail, then it receives 8 damage counters, which means Roaring Scream can deal a 160 damage attack either to the active or to the bench, which is really valuable for, again, knocking out single prize Pokemon or targeting down multi-prize Pokemon, because once again, Monkey Dory, although not taking damage off Screamtail very often, can take damage off other Pokemon and enhance the Screamtail damage output to sometimes now be knocking out the likes of Mew EX, for example, or over multiple turns other basic EX Pokemon quite comfortably. And at the same time, there's also Bravery Charm. Bravery Charm can push Screamtail up even further into that damage threshold, so Roaring Scream can deal much better numbers, essentially, which makes it a really dangerous spread attacker if you lean into the Bravery Charms within your deck list. And the other obvious inclusion here is Lily's Clefairy EX. Thanks to that Fairy Zone ability, the weakness of each of your opponent's Dragon Pokemon is now Psychic, and the context of the format dictates that Clefairy is just really useful in the deck. It now means that we can be hitting weakness into Dragapult EX in addition to Raging Bolt EX at some of the most popular Dragon-type Pokemon in the game right now, and it turns Clefairy itself into a very strong attacker, but as well as that, your other psychic Pokemon become much more devastating into those matchups, which are really relevant in the game right now. And by the same merit, Lily's Clefairy isn't too shabby of an attacker on its own. Full Moon Rondo for 1 Psychic, 1 Colorless does 20 plus 20 more for each benched Pokemon, both yours and your opponent. So it's actually pretty efficient, and in some instances, if you're only able to get 1 Gardevoir EX in play and it gets knocked out, thanks to the low energy attack cost of Clefairy, you can use this Pokemon to almost give yourself a fallback plan if you haven't been able to establish multiple Gardevoir, because it's just a cheap, efficient option within the deck as well. So these are, I think, the core Pokemon that you see within Gardevoir. The Stage 2 line itself, Monkey Dory augmenting that Psychic Embrace and turning it from a downside to an upside, Screamtail for being a great spread option in the deck, and Lily's Clefairy EX to make our Psychic type coverage even more devastating in the metagame. The real sequence of Gardevoir goes pretty simply, trying to get our Stage 2 in play, either via TM Evolution or via Rare Candy, and then the second mini quest is filtering out the Psychic energy from your deck and then finding them into the discard pile. That's why you'll see high counts of Earthen Vessel, Secret Box as our A-Spec, and Professor's Research in the deck as well, because we want to motor through and chuck our Psychic energy away as we go, because then it just acts as a nice reservoir for our Embrace throughout the entire game. Essentially, the more Psychic energy you have access to, the more options you have available, because you're constantly fueling your Adrenabrain, whilst giving yourself a variety of attackers to pick from, not just the ones on screen, but we're also going to talk about some other attackers that can show up within Gardevoir as well. But the general objective of the archetype is to get your Stage 2 online. That's when it really starts ticking. Maneuver those Psychic energy around to your advantage based on what attackers you'd like to use and how to split up your Adrenabrain, whilst of course constantly finding Darkness energy to turn attached to additional Monkey Dory to keep that pressure up during the game. With that in mind, let's take a look at a skeleton deck list. As you can see, I think 3 Monkey Dory is kind of a minimum here, and then we only need 1 copies of the Clefairy and the Screamtail because we have Super Rod and Night Stretcher to recover them in matchups where they're useful. Bear in mind, Super Rod can also grant us immediate access to the Pokemon again when an Artisan Stadium is in play. We can Rod and simply Artisan back out a Monkey Dory or a Screamtail and reuse it on the turn where it was knocked out previously, which is also important. You can see there's a couple supporting EX Pokemon here as well. Mew EX can be a great attacker because it's a Psychic type, so we can Embrace to it very easily for a genome hacking, and at the same time has that restart ability which can help us top up on cards, because there really isn't much engine in Gardevoir. We just rely on restart and we rely on flip the script ourselves from Pheasantipity EX. From there, it's really just supporter draw. That's why we're maximizing copies of Iono and Professor's Research, and we've also got a couple Arven in the deck list, which tends to help out with the TM Evolution package that we have here to try and get multiple Curlier developed, and can also grant us access to Secret Box, which is a phenomenal consistency booster within the deck. It can get us access to Artisan for some early basic Pokemon, in addition to some ball searching cards, rare candies, Earthen Vessels, these sorts of options. Gets us a supporter for the following turn, and oftentimes can help with that mission of discarding energy just from the use of Secret Box itself. So sometimes some very strong sequences involve using Vessel into a Secret Box or vice versa to then start discarding lots of things. That's why you also see maximum copies of Ultra Ball. Of course, it helps out with getting Gardevoir online, but it has such great synergy with Earthen Vessel or naturally finding Psychic so that you can get rid of them immediately and carry on with the rest of your turn, knowing that you can embrace those energies back later. The skeleton is 53 cards right now, which is fairly fleshed out, but still gives us the wiggle room to have potential different directions of Gardevoir as we head into the World Championships based on the context of the format. And let's dive into that context a little bit more. I did say that Gardevoir has been the most successful deck in the Destined Rivals format, and we can see from a glance here at the NAIC that Raging Bolt was the most popular deck in day 2 of the tournament, but if you look to the right side of the screen, the top 16, or actually top 15 asymmetrical cut, you'll notice that 3 of the top 4 decks are all Gardevoir variants, so it certainly has the stopping power to go the distance in these major tournaments. It seems to have been the correct play for the tournament, no doubt. And to Gardevoir's credit, it was at the very least the second most popular in day 2 of the NAIC, so it wasn't just a handful of phenomenal pilots making that top 4, also a number of other great players had really strong records going from day 1 into day 2 of that competition. Of course, we also need to take a look at the Japan Championships in 2025, because this event was actually played in the black and white format, so it actually grants great insight into the world's metagame here. We only have the top 32 to go off of, but Gardevoir did very well, with 7 of them finding their way into the top 32, and the highest places were actually Gardevoir Jelly variants. You can see in 6th place as well as 12th there are builds with the new Jellicent EX incorporated into the list that we will be discussing today. Its matchup data isn't too promising from the online scene, but it definitely is worth discussing because we have these results to look at. One final note then for metagaming is just the most played decks right now in the online scene. You got to take things with a pinch of salt in the online scene. It's somewhat a testing ground for players. There aren't real stakes on the line for the majority of these tournaments, so it's somewhat of a fun factor and trying out the new toys from the new set. And I think that might be a contributing factor to Golden Go's popularity right now, being the #1 played deck, but it also has had some good results and big upgrades from the new expansion. Don't be deceived by Gardevoir chilling out in 4th place, because if you also include the 3% from Gardevoir Jellicent variants, it jumps up to 9%, which actually would be the second most popular variant, unless you lumped all of the Dragapults together, which again would be another leapfrog towards the top. Long story short, Golden Go is picking up in popularity, but Gardevoir and Dragapult are still really popular decks in the format. They just seem to be a little bit more divided up in terms of which deck list to go with. Let's take a quick peek at the matchup data for Gardevoir in the online scene then. This is taken from Trainer Hill, a snapshot of the 18th to the 31st of July in events held that are over 50 players. The very favourable matchups for Gardevoir seem to be Dragapult, Dusknoir and Raging Bolt, and I think clearly the Lily's Clefairy EX has a big hand in that. Equally, it seems pretty strong into straight Dragapult variants, Typhlosion builds and Flareon EX decks. It's got an even win rate into the Dragazard build, obviously being the most difficult because Charizard provides type coverage that can one-hit KO Gardevoir more easily and gives the Dragapult players a non-psychic weak Pokemon to attack with much more bulk. And the Gardevoir Jellicent deck is also pretty balanced. We have a mild unfavoured matchup into Charizard Pidgeot, but the worst matchups for Gardevoir seem to be Golden Go EX, Grimmsnarl EX, and Joltik Box. Golden Go represents one-hit KO potential and has an annoying amount of hit points to deal with. Many of the single prize Pokemon can't reach, and then has a number of healing cards like Turo and Picnic Basket. Grimmsnarl EX once again offers one-hit KO potential into your big EX, whilst also representing bench spread from its own Monkey Dory use, Frostlass, and its own Snipe. And the big headache from Joltik Box really comes from Iron Hands EX coming out the gate swinging and just mopping up a bunch of prize cards, whilst also having the option for Blood Moon EX on a Pheasantipity, or perhaps a Pikachu plus damage modifier to take a knockout on Gardevoir EX during the game. We can also look at the data for the Jellicent builds of Gardevoir, and it doesn't make for good reading. It actually looks like across the board, the Jellicent variants are doing a lot worse than the straight builds of Gardevoir that we've come to know. We do have to cut some corners to fit in the frequent 2-2 line of Jellicent EX, and it seems like the item lock is already being prepared for by a number of decks in format, thanks to the heavy presence of Budju in the meta. So even though the ability and the attack from Frillish are both very disruptive and gives you panic late game options, it doesn't necessarily have to be core within the deck list because we are sacrificing quite a bit just to fit the Jelly package in. So right now the data looks pretty poor for Jellicent, which does make me skeptical, but I will be going over the benefits of this package as well later on in the video. Now that we've discussed the meta in greater detail, let's talk about filling those final slots and the cards that I'm considering. I did have Mew EX in my own skeleton, but it's not actually always showing up in Gardevoir. I did just want to give some main benefits for why it's powerful. Of course, that extra draw power on top of Pheasantipity for other matchups where your opponent will play around the flip the script is really handy, but it also is a really versatile attacker. Right now, you have some great EX Pokemon that you can be copying. Charizard EX towards the late game, Dragapult EX copying their own Phantom Dive is devastating at times, especially when you combine it with Lily's Clefairy EX. Raging Bolt, this is an easy 2-prize for 2-prize trade, which you genuinely don't mind in the matchup if your opponent has been forced to take a single prize KO during the game. Iron Hands EX, there are situations where you can Monkey Dory and Iron Hands into range of being amped, and that actually means that you can take the single prize on Joltik, and it actually ends up helping you in the long run if you set up Iron Hands for a 3-prize KO with its own amp you very much. And finally, you have an easy KO on Flareon EX for just 3 energy as well. Next up, there's Drifloon and Bravery Charm as a package then, and that Balloon Blast is some of the best one-hit KO potential that Gardevoir can have access to. Many builds that lean too heavily into Monkey Dory and choose not to have Drifloon may lack some stopping power from a single prize threat. That's the main thing here, is that Drifloon can be used to offset those prize cards, provided you're ending the game with this card, or if you don't expect much tool removal, because of course Tool Scrapper is also coming out in black and white, so there's that and the jamming tower that you have to contend with here. But at the same time, just adding in Bravery Charm into your deck list has great synergy with Screamtail. Now you're not just limited to some of the lower hit point EX Pokemon. The Bravery Charm buff of 50 hit points pushes that Roaring Scream to be much more devastating, and it can also be used into those Dragon matchups to try and protect your Clefairy EX, or sometimes even Bravery Charm Mew EX as a copying option with a Clefairy in play. That could be a massive headache for Dragapult players, and also frustrating for the Raging Bolts that may have to do additional discards for you to then catch them with Ionos later on in the game. Essentially, Bravery Charm can be useful on a ton of your basic Pokemon, whether you're trying to stay out of range of Monkey Dory from the opponent, or reach higher damage output with your single prize Pokemon. There's a lot of reasons to like this package, however it does take up a number of slots. Then there's the Jellicent EX and Frillish. I haven't really mentioned Frillish just yet, but it's a new basic Pokemon that does have a 1 energy attachment item locking attack, and it does have 3 retreat, which is actually quite handy because it can help you generate lots of Monkey Dory damage simply by ramping up 6 counters on the Frillish to retreat, so then you can have 2 monkeys usable whilst you go into a new Pokemon. Similar to how we often pivot Gardevoir EX within the deck and generate 4 damage counters for ourselves, the Jellicent generates 6 damage for us to play with Monkey Dory, so simply having that as an option to go in and out of during the turns, even if you're not attacking with this Pokemon, can be a real big benefit. And it can make that Oceanic Gloon much more dangerous when you factor in Monkey Dory damage ticks as well. Jellicent's ability is also so frustrating, especially with Air Balloon being such a popular tool right now. You can build board states where they don't really have a good boss's orders target, so even if they're alleviating their lock, they're not able to do really what they want to on their turn by simply trapping Pokemon that don't yet have balloons on them and getting some poke pressure in with Power Press. There's no doubt that both Jellicent and Frillish can create great late-game board states that can checkmate opponents if they're expecting to use their superior energy retrievals or night stretchers or air balloons to get them out of a certain spot. So it can give you all sorts of backdoor win conditions, even if it only buys you wiggle room for 1 or 2 turns during a game, as you amass more damage on their side of the field with your combination of attacks and Monkey Dories yourself. Next up, we have a couple basic Pokemon. Fluttermane has become more popular as of late. Fluttermane can deactivate some annoying abilities against you, for example Jellicent, in the mirror. It can also slow down some draw from Golden Go, and be a nuisance to Latias EX players that rely on that Pokemon to retreat. There are some panic situations where you can try and bring that Pokemon up, go Midnight Fluttering, slam the Iono, and hope to dodge boss's orders. And at the same time, Hex Hurl just works really nicely with Monkey Dory. It has a 3 energy attack cost, which gives you 2 Adrenabrains. Then you have a 90 damage hit and 2 counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon in any way that you like. This can be an easy way to knock out a Shaman in one turn with double Dory plus Hex Hurl because counter placement gets around Shaman, and that unlocks your Screamtail as a more viable attacker on the future turns. And at the same time, we know that monkey walls are just so prevalent right now, and having those extra counters can sometimes put you in range, especially against the likes of Grimmsnarl that like to set up counters with their Frostlass. Now you can punish them by going a little bit over the damage they potentially expected coming back into them on the following turn. Another disruptive locking basic is Klefki, and similar to Fluttermane, there are lots of ways we can try and soft lock our opponent here with that mischievous lock ability. You can try and shove it in the early turns and just slow down some potential turbo engines. Again, we can try and do some interesting trapping plays into Latias. And curiously, we actually lock Genesect EX out of Golden Go players, and with many of those archetypes opting to cut Ultra Ball entirely, we can make it much more awkward for them to find their Golden Go and get their draw engine established. One of the other really cool benefits of Klefki is that you can use your Monkey Dory, then end your turn by bringing Klefki into the active position and denying your opponent's use of Adrenabrain. This can really help out, especially if we're trying to do devolution strategies. Often the 10 poke from Joust can actually be quite relevant with so many 70 hit point basic Pokemon, so ending on a Klefki really isn't the worst thing in the world, especially if we stay on even prize cards against these evolving decks, deny their use of Counter Catcher to get around the Klefki, and cross our fingers that they can't use monkeys back on us, knowing that we can try and sweep the board on the following turn with a retreat of Klefki, or if it gets knocked out from the opponent, and we once again unlock our own Adrenabrain. Klefki is one of the more awkward to use cards within this deck, but it really does have some cute lines of play available to it. For non-damaging options, there's your own Shaman that could come into the deck list. This can give you some great protection against Baby Raging Bolt. It can also be useful in the mirror match and against Grimmsnarl. Cleffa could be a decent Pokemon to give you options just to simply play the game, by having now an Artisan option for Cleffa that can get us into some more cards. There's also some interesting supporter options. Gardevoir is one of the few decks in format that doesn't play boss's orders commonly, but it can still be included into the deck list, simply giving you more lines of play available, where you don't have to constantly be in fear of lacking Gust when your opponent is playing around your counter catchers. Professor Tourist Scenario is an interesting card as well. Sometimes you can create completely single prize board states by picking up your Gardevoir, provided you have backup Ralts and Curlier available to simply evolve back into them on a future turn. And in a similar vein, we can use this card to pick up the likes of Pheasantipity or Mew EX during the game. There's also niche scenarios where you can pick up a monkey and put it back down and attach for turn a Darkness Energy to give yourself an additional Adrenabrain even if your board is clogged up. There are quite a few benefits to this card, but it's really just down to timing. Because you lack a real draw engine in Gardevoir, you can't always time these supporters effectively. E-Switch Turbo Energize was incorporated at the NAIC to a first place finish, really leaning as heavily as possible into your Monkey Dory. In these instances, I would expect to have 4 Monkey, 4 Dark to really make the most out of these inclusions, so again, you're just simply using more Adrenabrain than your opponent during the set. And a quick note to Buddy Buddy Poffin, it feels so strange to not have it included in the deck list. I feel like it would only ever be a 1 count for a potential Arven or Box target. But if you simply accept that Box won't be prized, you can always go Nestable plus Artisan anyway, so you can try and recreate the effect of a Poffin in the aggregate. I feel like, especially if you're looking to include Drifloon or Klefki, the value of this card does go up slightly, and in those instances I would look to have it as an include. But for other builds, I think it's more of a debate. I do have 4 example deck lists to go over then, and the first one is going to be a Monkey Dory focus build that does have the 4 Dark, 4 Monkey Dory, and the 1 Energy switch. The one thing I haven't gone with is the Turbo Energize. I feel like with even the 3 copies of Arven, not just the 2, and the Secret Box, it doesn't always come off as I'd like, especially because very often I will prioritize TM Evo anyway, as a safer option towards my Gardevoir. I have weaved in 1 Bravery Charm even without the use of Drifloon, because I already think that Bravery Charm protecting Screamtail and Clefairy provides enough benefit. The next deck list is Old Faithful really, where we have shoved in the 2 copies of Bravery Charm as well as Drifloon to give ourselves the very powerful single prize threats. And even though Tool Scrapper is being printed and Tool Jammer is a threat in the format, not many opponents are opting to play these cards because there are so many different ways to play Gardevoir. This isn't even a true tech card for one matchup, if there'll be certain builds of Gardevoir where it's ineffective. By that same merit, you can try and play around these stadiums by simply using them as late game bombs, knowing that Drifloon is never going to be KO'd regardless, you just use it as a finisher. The next deck list is a Devolution build that also incorporates that Klefki. So again, we're going back to 4 Monkey, 4 Darkness Energy. And in this instance, we're trying to get cheeky with that TM Devo, which is a great option alongside your Klefki as well, by the way. If you're anticipating more Dragger Zard builds and straight Zard builds, I think the Devolution gives you a lot of great outs to still play into those matchups. And the final build then, the Jellicent. And the matchup data is devastating for this archetype, but it has some of the best results from Japan in their major, so it's hard to weigh up just how much weaker this is to a straight build of Gardevoir, because ultimately the core of the deck in terms of consistency isn't really affected too much. Sure, we have to go down to 2 Arven, but many players do that anyway. And adding more basics within your deck is not really a bad thing, and it gives you a high roll of a starter in the 2 copies of Frillish. In this instance, I'm cutting down to 1 TM Evo in order to fit 1 Bravery Charm and 1 Devo. Bravery Charm's kind of interesting here, where actually it's really handy on Frillish. It can give you checkmate plays into Golden Go players by pushing yourself up to 130 and announcing Oceanic Gloom throughout the game. Even something like a Levincia within their deck list won't be enough to get a KO on Frillish, and you can keep announcing this attack consistently if they've overcommitted their energy for a big Gardevoir KO. Once again, Devolution is really strong here. It works really nicely with Frillish setup damage as well as Jellicent's Power Press, so it fits pretty naturally into this build. Let's end on talking about some of the matchups for Gardevoir then. And in the mirror, oftentimes it comes down to Monkey Dory, and you're probably going to hear that in a lot of the matchup breakdowns here. Being on top of your own Adrenabrains and limiting your opponent is going to be really important here. Oftentimes, not taking knockouts and locking your opponent out of potential space for Monkey Dory can be huge, or simply targeting them down as often as possible with Screamtails and Countercatchers. All good things to be thinking about. You do have to be aware of your opponent's opportunity to use TM Devolution, so you want to be prize checking your rare candies and keeping an eye on which have evolved from Ralts and which from Curlier to see if at any point both of your potential Gardevoirs can be in danger of 1 Devo play with a number of Adrenabrain. By the same merit, know that many Gardevoir only have Gust in the form of Countercatcher, so you have to be very cautious about how you map out your prize cards as the game goes on. Oftentimes, staying neck and neck is a strong policy. Iona is going to be crucial in the mirror match always, and be aware that Flip the Script is one of your opponent's best ways to draw cards, so as you dwindle down to that late game to play around their Fez and their Countercatcher, oftentimes setting up a 3 or 2 prize KO is going to be your best means to win. Again, that comes with a caveat if leaving that damage around doesn't give your opponent more benefits with their own Adrenabrain anyway. So it's going to be a really math-based matchup no matter what, and you have to play the board accordingly. The other thing that will be fairly easy to scout out in those opening turns is whether your opponent is going to be opting to have Frillish and Jellicent within their build. If that is the case, there are situations where you might have to proactively play the likes of your Night Stretchers or Super Rods, so that they can't do a random trap plus gloom play into you. Even with the 1 retreat cost of Pheasantipity, that's possible if you've overcommit on your resources. And equally, if you're looking to Night Stretcher back a Pokemon for your endgame win con, for example a Screamtail or Drifloon, do be aware they can try and shut that down with a Frillish as well. Next up, one of our toughest matchups, the Grimmsnarl EX. Grimmsnarl itself is of course a massive threat. That type coverage is devastating, and also Shadow Bullet dealing 30 alongside the number of Adrenabrain can be really scary. Of course, your opponent is going to be weaving in their monkeys like crazy, and they have Frostlass ticking over their Pokemon at the same time, generating their own damage output. Once again, there's the fear of TM devolution, and you have to be aware of your opponent's use of Counter Catcher. Similar to Gardevoir, Grimmsnarl doesn't have much of an engine at its disposal, so denying your opponent's outs to Arven CC is massive. It's also vital that you basically never leave damage on Grimmsnarl, unless for some reason your opponent has no Monkey Dory established whatsoever, because it's a really easy way for them to get heal and a damage mod all in one go. That means you're going to be looking to do spread damage from Screamtail, or counter-catchering up these Pokemon alongside their Frostlass. I actually feel like your best way to win as Gardevoir is to play from even or behind in prizes, simply to shut down your opponent's CC. Where towards the late game, you're kind of playing chicken with them having boss's orders or not, when they're thrown to a low hand size from Iono and have no draw engine to get there. On the flip side, Dragapult is one of our better matchups. Of course, you still have to contend with their Adrenabrain, which can combine dangerously with Phantom Dive, especially when you're heavily damaging some of your basic Psychic Pokemon. It's actually not too difficult for Dragapult to still construct 3 prize KOs if you get too fruity with your Screamtail or Drifloon. That means it's really important to Adrenabrain off the likes of your Screamtail, leaving it with 40 hit points remaining rather than 30 for an easy Monkey Dory knockout. Or potentially Bravery Charming them up, keeping them out of a Gust Phantom Dive 2 prize KO play, where they take out a Monkey Dory and your Screamtail. Do be aware that this is certainly a matchup where Jamming Tower is common, so over-damaging those basic Pokemon is a real no-no. In this case, it's a little bit more difficult for you to play from behind because it's so easy for you to construct multi-prize KOs, and there's big benefits to it. But just be aware of your opponent's use of Counter Catcher and how that can hurt your engine during the game, knowing that you're often playing as a head here. The only exception to that is if the opponent comes out the gate strong with Budew Itchy Pollen lock and can slow build a Dragapult while you struggle to find your Curlier or TM Evo. Of course, the low hit points of Budew can easily be punished by our own Adrenabrain plays, but bear in mind this can be a cute Pokemon that sticks around on their board all game and eats up a bench space, clogging their use of Hawlucha, Monkey Dory, Pheasantipity, all of these things. So I often really enjoy keeping Budew around all game, knowing that that can be part of your final 2 or 3 prize KO turn. That does give you some hope of Counter Catcher for game. Dragadustawa is basically the same matchup, but just more dangerous, I suppose, because they can get really fruity with Curse Blast whilst taking out a Gardevoir in one hit, or taking out your bench Pokemon a little bit quicker if all things come together for them. It's a tough pill to swallow really, but this is more down to how your opponent draws. Curse Blast can just grant them access to Counter Catcher and can sweep up the board, so you really have to play defensively and carefully, sometimes even putting down 3 Rolts into play, which does feel really terrible, but at the very least you know that Gardevoir is a really strong attacker in the matchup, and simply getting that online gives you so much advantage. Into the Dragazard matchup then, and Charizard of course is the big threat. He's a really chunky and annoying Pokemon to deal with that has that great damage output at its disposal. Again, it feels bad to just set up damage across the board, but it probably is the best policy in this case to force your opponent into boss's orders plays. Even using Monkey Dory's Mind Bend has got a lot worse into this matchup now that Air Balloon is a card they're going to be maining over the rescue board, although it can still be a way to prevent the opponent from using Burning Darkness on the following turn, while setting up the Charizard for a 2-hit KO, which is oftentimes what you have to look for in this matchup. The other thing to be aware of is getting too fruity with early game knockouts on Budew or Cleffa, because an unfair stamp could easily be coming your way and put you down to that low hand size, which means you want to pre-play down your Pheasantipity EX and potentially Mew EX as well, so that you have some safeguard against the unfair stamp. Or if your hand's strong enough, potentially holding off from the early secret box that you often look to do on turn 1, so that Arven can give you outs to continue playing the game post unfair stamp. Onto the Golden Go matchup, Make It Rain obviously represents devastating damage output, and they're very boss and bundle focused these days, so you have to expect them to target down your multi-prizes as and when they want to, whilst at the same time having access to a lot of healing. That really seems to be where Golden Go has pushed its direction to gain advantages into these other Stage 2 matchups, oftentimes playing multiple copies of Professor Toro's scenario, oftentimes playing Picnic Basket, and sometimes even Monkey Dory Dark as well. So if you are trying to set up damage for KOs, often over-damaging these Pokemon is worthwhile, so you can play around some of these healing effects, or simply incorporating more one-hit KO cards, for example Drifloon, back into your deck. The good news is Golden Go has really moved away from Jamming Tower for the most part, and instead is often playing Levincia. If you're playing Friddish and Jellicent, that's actually bad for you because they can have means of getting energy back even under the item and tool lock. But if you're looking to go bravery based, this could be a big benefit to you because you have to be a lot less fearful of them simply bouncing and taking a KO on your single prizer mid-turn. Although it is worth noting that a number of them might play Tool Scrapper now rather than Jamming Tower. From what I've seen in Decklists, it's not that common, but it is possible for Golden Go if they really have it out for Gardevoir players. As for our strategy, really, it's a lot of Ionos, so your opponent can't always construct Boss plus Superior plus, enough damage to Make It Rain KO you, or have the option to Turo plus get a bunch of energy back in one go. These sort of things are still your best case scenario, but do be aware that with these items, abilities, and supporters, they will be wiping damage off your board, causing some headache. Onto Raging Bolt then, this is actually one of your better matchups, not too much to be concerned about. Jamming Tower is within their deck list, so it can remove damaged Pokemon from their side of the board if they have already got Area 0 developed, and it can be used, aggressively to take out our heavily damaged Pokemon, although there's not much reason for you to go crazy with Drifloon or Screamtail, to be honest with you, so you shouldn't really be falling into that trap. I think a bigger concern is that they can just slam Judge on you with a Noctowl turn 1 or 2 and start announcing KOs with the likes of Fan Rotom. So trying to lead out with your Monkey Dories and essentially just anything better than Ralts is a good choice, so that they're forced into a Crispin or Sada play and go for Baby Bolt instead. Because honestly, taking one with Rotom and going Judge is pretty scary, to be fair. Also bear in mind that Bundle and Raging Bolt will be trying to target down anytime you have a lone Ralts, so prioritizing multiple of those is going to be important. But generally, this matchup favors you quite a bit, I would say. Into Joltik box then, they have a very simple strategy. Use Joltik, get Iron Hands online, and try and use Crispin and Boss's Orders throughout the remainder of the game to top up on Gust and Energy cards. The obvious things to bear in mind here is that they will be playing Bundle, Prime, and Boss's Orders, so they're always going to find a way around that Gardevoir. I think it's actually really nice to Bravery Charm Pheasantipity in this matchup, so that in the later stages, they can't simply bundle their way to win with the option of Blood Moon or Iron Hands. You actually stay out of range in that instance, and that can be really handy. It's definitely one of those matchups where you want to poke an Iron Hands and Monkey Dory finish it off on a future turn. The same can be said for the Resolute Heart of Pikachu, but oftentimes your opponent's going to go up 4 prizes with their Iron Hands. It's going to be down to you to use Iono and not take a knockout but set up win on the future turn by heavily damaging multiple multi-prize basics. The other shout out is that they could be rocking damage modifiers. If you see Arven Vit banned, that can be trouble. It means Pikachu can KO Gardy. And every now and then they can play Gravity Mountain within the list. It's hard for them to find. But again, it's just another reason for you to try and play around that Fez as best you can, because you don't want to give them dig towards game via the Stadium Include. No doubt this is a matchup where Gardevoir is your bread and butter attacker, but also keep in mind that Mew EX can get cheeky as well using Ampy very much if you want to take out their Joltik with Adrenabrain. It can actually be one of the better ways for you to take win here, and it also denies their use of Galvantula, which can be an annoying Pokemon to deal with. Into the Flareon matchup, this one's actually pretty okay on paper, but they do have a lot of avenues and things for you to bear in mind. Of course, you have to worry about the Angelite attack for potential Sylveon EX players, so again, trying to play your board in an interesting way is important. Either having multiple threats lined up, for example, a Gardevoir, a Ralts, and a Clefairy that already has at least one energy attached could be strong, or in some instances, it's going to be a triple Ralts angle, so that you're always representing the Psychic Embrace. Leafeon EX doesn't seem awkward on the surface, but if you get too fruity with your energy attachments as you start using more Monkey Dory and whatnot, that Verdant Storm actually can take knockouts on your Gardevoir, especially with Gravity Mountain in the mix as well. Both Flareon and Leafeon can find ways to KO your Gardevoir with this Stadium Inclusion, which is becoming more and more common since the NAIC. The final note is trying to play around that Briar, either by going down to a single prize or 3 prize cards instead of going down to 2 with your single prize attacking Mon and thinking that's the best course of action. Your opponent will simply Noctowl and laugh in your face as they Briar for win. So whenever you see those EVs, you gotta think Briar, and you gotta think that you're working your end game playing around either those prizes or weaving in a Gardevoir EX attack towards those later stages if you are choosing to go down to 2 prize cards for win on the following turn. Typhlosion's been quite popular online, and it is a pretty devastating single prize attacker, so I did think it was worthwhile talking about now that it has the Brave Bangle inclusion from Black and White. This deck will often be packing the Picnic Basket to try and undo some of your math, so oftentimes the Devo strategy is more of a bait, and it's better to try and take out multiple Pokemon with your Adrenabrain and Screamtail all in one go instead. And I actually think targeting down the likes of their Drakloak or the Dunsparce, whatever they choose to play as an engine Pokemon, is often a bait, and it's usually better to just keep targeting down the Ethan's Pokemon turn by turn. It constantly forces them to find Night Stretchers and Super Rods, and re-establish their Stage 2 line to keep their flow of attackers. It's also worth noting that Buddy Blast can of course reach into Gardevoir, Gravity Mountain can be within their deck, as well as Brave Bangle of course. And Secret Box is actually the sneakiest damage modifier of them all, because your opponent can use triple Ethan's Quilava, get those Ethans into hand, then they can Arven Secret Box, and the box then discards those Ethan. The Buddy Blast can be really dangerous really early on in the game, so don't be fooled that they've only played one on turn 2, they've got a couple Quilavas out, that they're not going to be able to knock out a Gardevoir. In fact, you're ready for the taking. So it really is going to be about reloading those single prizes in this matchup to keep up in a race as best you can. And as always, keep topped up on your own Monkey Dory so that you can target down those Cyndaquil as you go. The final matchup to discuss then is Charizard Pidgeot. This did win the Seniors Division at the NAIC, and I do think there's good merits around the archetype because we have such a strong deck list to go off of from Gabriel Fernandez. Charizard is TM Evo based very often, so naturally plays quite well around TM Devolution, and has a number of healing cards. Again, expect Monkey Dory Luminous, expect Picnic Basket, and expect Professor Turo within the list as well. And it only gets worse, they even have Air Balloon now at their disposal if they want it in the deck. They can play around Monkey Dory, which was previously one of your better defenses against Charizard, simply confuse it and force them to retreat out and get multiple stage 2s developed, really almost distract their quick search into certain avenues of play, or make them flip that coin. Now that avenue is, I think, firmly more shut. I've put both Charizard and Pidgeot themselves as threats because if they have Quick Search online, they're constantly going to be finding Boss or finding Iono and finding their premium card for each turn, so that's a threat. But by the same merit, the Charizard itself is a monster beat stick that you can't really ignore. The one thing I will say is they do have vulnerable basic Pokemon. If you're the one going second, getting TM Evo online, you can oftentimes catch them without rare candying, and suddenly you can be picking off a number of their basics early on with Adrenabrains and Screamtail and such. I think trying to deny these stage 2s coming into play is typically your best policy, and for once being the aggressor is actually a really good thing for you here. I won't sugarcoat it though, this one's still not a great matchup. And that's it for Gardevoir EX. No doubt this is going to be a popular pick for players. It's been such a consistent performer throughout the entire season, and in fact for a number of seasons now. There's no doubt it's versatile. You have so many flexible options with your attacking lines of play, where you use your Adrenabrain, and how you try and navigate towards the late game turns. I do think it's quite a volatile format for Gardevoir, not just is Charizard creeping back into the mix, Grimmsnarl being ever popular, and Golden Go becoming a more powerful threat. But there's also just so much healing in the game right now. Picnic Basket is not a meme, it's actually quite an important card in the metagame right now. Turo Scenario is more of a consideration than ever. And I think Gardevoir is that public enemy number 1, so you have to go into the World Championships knowing that your opponent has tested against this archetype a lot, and has to know their lines of play to try and make it difficult for you. The good news for Gardevoir, I discussed 4 different deck lists today, and I all think they're viable given the right metagame. And your opponent kind of knows that too, so they have to play around like 65 or 70 cards that could potentially be within your deck list. That's going to be a headache for them. The fact that you can threaten Devo without it even being in your list, the fact that you threaten Frillish, all of these things just being in the toolkit of Gardevoir can make your opponent play weirdly at times, and in some instances can actually be a benefit to you. So thanks Jellicent, even if you're not playing it at the World Championships, you're at least making the opponent think about it as those early turns develop. Thanks so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed today's World Spotlight. I'm of course coming back for the other deck lists as well. It just felt right to begin with Gardevoir because it's such a powerful deck in the format and has been for so long. Are you planning on bringing Gardevoir yourself or tackling it in the tournaments? Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.